see. I was like, how does he see? Yeah. There's a screen. Your transcendental vision, you can just see it all.
I have to turn around so that be and watch.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishnupad, Paramhamsa Parvajakacharya, To Tarasata Shri Śrīmad Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki, Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki, Samveda Bhaktivinoda Ki, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the symbol devotees. All glories to the symbol devotees. All glories to the symbol devotees. All glories to Shri, Shri Guru, and Shri Gauranga. Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Jakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Bitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, I understand that we're on 3rd Canto, Chapter 7, Text 10. Is that what you all also have? That's what Natavagaranga had listed. So, we will do this one responsively. Yad artena vinamushya. Yad artena vinamushya. Pungsam atma viparyayaha. Pungsam atma viparyayaha. Pratiyata upadrushta. Pratiyata upadrush. Pratiyata upadrushtu. Pratiyata upadrushtu. Svashirashchedanadika. Svashirashchedanadika. Yad artena vima. Yad artena vinamushya. Pumsam atma viparyayaha. Pratiyata upadrashtu. Svashiraschedanadikaha. Yad artena vimanusya. Pumsamatma viparyayaha. Pratiyata upadrashtuhu. Svashidas chedanadikaha. Yad artena vimamushya. Pumsamatma viparyayaha. Pratiyata upadrashtuhu. Svashidas chetanadikaha. Yad artena vimamushya. Pumsam atma viparyayaha. Upratiyata upadrashtuhu. Swashiras chedanadikaha. Ladies? Yad artena vinamushya. Pumsam atma viparyayaha. Pratiyata upadrashtuhu. Svashirash chedanadikaha. The translation reads, the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. So I will say, and you please repeat, the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Prabhupada's purport. A teacher in school once threatened his pupil that he would cut the pupil's head and have it hang on the wall so the child could see how his head had been cut off. The child became frightened and stopped the mischief. Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and disruption of his self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls these mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he ever lose his pure knowledge. In his pure consciousness, when he thinks a little seriously about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the mercy of the Supreme, and that his attempt to become one with the Supreme Lord is a false illusion. Life after life, the living entity falsely tries to lord it over the material nature and become the lord of the material world. But there is no tangible result. At last, when frustrated, he gives up his material activities and tries to become one with the Lord and speculate with much jugglery of words, but without success. These activities are performed under the dictation of the illusory energy. The experience is compared to the experience of one's having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses the power to see. Therefore, if a man sees his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in a hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and he has this knowledge with him, but artificially, he thinks that he is God himself, and that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya. This conception has no meaning, just as there's no meaning to seeing one's head being cut off. This is the process by which knowledge is covered. And because this artificial rebellious condition of the living entity gives him all troubles, it is to be understood that he should take his normal life as a devotee of the Lord and be relieved from the misconception of being God. The so-called liberation of thinking oneself God is the last reaction of avidya by which the living entity is entrapped. The conclusion is that a living entity is deprived of eternal transcendental service to the Lord, becomes illusioned in many ways. Even in his conditioned life, he is the eternal servant of the Lord. His servitude is under the spell of the illusory Maya. His servitude under the spell of illusory Maya is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is therefore put under the service of Maya. He is still serving, but in a perverted manner. When he wants to get out of the service under material bondage, he next desires to become one with the Lord. This is another illusion. The best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and thus get rid of the illusory Maya for good, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Daivihi esha gunamai mama maya duratyaya mame vaye prapadyante mayam itam tarantite. Yad artena vinamushya pungsam atma viparyayaha pratiyata upadrashtuhu svashiras chedanadikaha. The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. This is the beginning of Maitreya beginning to answer the questions of Vidura. Nikunja Bihari the other day made the point that he counted 5 questions, and yeah, you can see that. In Burijan's unveiling his lotus feet, he compresses them into 3 questions, and I think it's a little easier to deal with that way. The 3 questions are simple. They were listed in verses 1 through 7 in this chapter at the very beginning. Here now we're at 10, where from 8 on is where Maitreya begins to answer the questions of Vidura. So from 1 to 10, the 3 basic questions are these. The first question is, why does the Supreme Lord come to the material world? Does he have some desire to fulfill in the material world? And if he does come to the material world, is he then influenced by the material world? That's kind of like 2 questions in one. So why does the Supreme Lord come to the material world? Is he attracted by something in the material world? And if he does come to the material world, does he become influenced by it? That's the first question. And then the second question is, the living entity is understood to be pure and unchangeable because the soul is perfect and unchangeable and is indeed just a fragment of the Supreme. So therefore, how does the living entity become completely bewildered in the material world? How is that possible? And of course, the third question is also a very interesting question. The living entity always has the supersoul, which is a manifestation of the Supreme within his heart. And if that's true, then how can the living entity become bewildered and misled the way that he is? So how is that possible? Why does the supersoul allow that? Why does the living entity not make or take advantage of the supersoul? So these are important three questions. They kind of get right to the core of why we're here in the material world. How did we get here? Why did we get here? What do we do to get out? And what's the relationship of us to the Supreme Lord and to the material energy? So in this purport, Prabhupada explains about several misconceptions that living entities have about being in this material world. We see in Bhagavad Gita, as Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, he is revealing something or talking about something that we usually call the yoga ladder. And if you can grasp the concept of the yoga ladder, it really helps make Bhagavad Gita very easy to understand, much, much more easy to understand. So at the very bottom rung of the yoga ladder, we have what are known as Dvipadapashas. And that's Sanskrit. It means two-legged animals. Means human beings who have made absolutely no attempt to better themselves in any type of way, spiritually speaking. So these are Dvipadapashus, two-legged animals. Then above them is what we call karma kanda, which is the recognition that there is a system going on in this material world. And that system is explained in the Vedas. And if we follow that system, we can live a much more materially happy life. That's 2 on the yoga ladder. 3 on the yoga ladder is karma yoga, where now we have recognized that there is a system, and that system has to do with trying to please, or actually trying to understand that there is a supreme being of some kind. And therefore, one wants to try to strike a deal with the Supreme, so that by pleasing the Supreme will please the living entity. It's a business deal. And this is karma yoga. So beneath these 3, so you've got Dvipadapashu, or two-legged animals, karma kanda, and karma yoga. All these 3 have one thing in common, and that is that the living entity, his real goal is material happiness in all 3 of these. But in one case, he doesn't care how he gets the material happiness. That's the bottom one. The second one, karma kanda, he wants material happiness, but he's just doing various formulas to get it. In the third one, he wants material happiness, but he understands that there's a supreme being, and he's trying to get it through pleasing the Supreme Lord. So these are all not exactly what we want. Now above that is what we know as Gyan Yoga. And Gyan Yoga means a person has finally come to the realization that material happiness is worthless. I'm not going to try to please the Lord to get it. I'm not going to perform rituals to get it. I'm certainly not going to do sinful activities to get it. So that's the beginning of the first leaving of the material consciousness behind, when a person finally recognizes that material happiness is not what it's cracked up to be. It never happens, hardly ever. We get little sprinkles of it, but that's about it. And spending any effort of whatever kind towards it is a waste of time. So then that's what we call Gyan Yoga. And Prabhupada mentions in this purport that the jnana yogi, that's the person who recognizes that there is some mystery going on in the world, and he wants to understand, well, if material happiness isn't the real goal of everything, well, what is? So that person begins an investigation through various groups and philosophies and books and various traditions explaining the mystery of the world, the mystery of life. So that's the Jnana Yogi. And usually such a person tries to pull away from sense gratification. Now, above that is what we call the Astanga Yogi, where a person now realizes that there is a system to understand things. We're not just going to read random books or try to, wrangle various philosophies in our mind. There's a system, and that system is a yoga system. By doing breath and by various physical postures, one can gain a type of mystic consciousness. So that's the Astanga Yogi. And then by doing that, one will try to become one with God. So Prabhupada mentions that. That's another misconception, that we can become one with God. Of course, technically we can become one with God in a sense. We can become one with God by merging into the Brahmajyoti, the white light, but we can only do so for a period of time. Because there is no activity, there's no rasa, there's no real taste in merging with Brahman, what's known as Sayujya Mukti. One becomes bored with it after some time and has to come back to the material world. Ye nye ravindaksha vimuktamaninas tvayashta bhavadava shuddha buddhya ayuya krichena parampadam tata patantyada nadrata yusmadangreya. So those who try to merge with the Supreme, which Prabhupada here calls the last snare of avidya. So vidya means knowledge, avidya means ignorance. And so these are all misconceptions. These are the various misconceptions that the living entity has, that he is God, that material happiness is worth having, that one can get material happiness through some ritual, that one is pleasing God, but really he's using God as his waitress. He's got his menu there, he's got picked out what he wants, and by offering God some words of praise, some rituals, then he hopes that God will reciprocate by giving him what he wants on his menu. So this is what I call God as waitress concept. So these are all misconceptions. But of course the question that Maitreya is answering is, how does the living entity get caught up in this? Well, let's just do a quick review of the three answers to the three questions. The first question was, the Supreme, does he have some desire in the material world? And when he comes to the material world, is he in some way influenced by the material world? So the answer is, the Supreme has no desire for anything within the material world. He is everything. So he's truly, like in Christmas time, what do you give the man who has everything? He really is the man who has everything, literally. And so there's nothing attracting him to the material world. He just comes to enjoy relationships. So that's what Krishna is actually after, is relationships. He's self-satisfied, he's Atmaram, so he doesn't need anything, but he wants relationships. And he wants relationships not just with some people, but with everyone, every living entity. Now, some of those living entities have jumped ship. They're no longer in the spiritual world where they are easy to have a relationship with. They're here. So he comes to reclaim them. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Adi Lila, we discover that there is what's known as the internal reasons why the Supreme Lord comes and the external reasons that he comes. The Bahir Vichara and the I can't think of the other word, but there's the internal and the external reasons. The external reason the Supreme Lord comes is that he comes to deliver us from the material world. He comes to create pastimes that will attract us, to give us the rules of bhakti that we can follow to get out of here. So that's why he comes. That's called the external reason. The internal reason he comes is to enjoy his own particular rasas here. And therefore the Supreme creates very interesting situations. And in this way, he enjoys various rasas with his living entities, his devotees, and those who are gradually learning how to turn away from the material world and once again reciprocate with him. So the Supreme Lord is always the master of the three modes of nature. They're never his master. He is never controlled by them. Therefore, he is known as Nirgun, or sometimes Guneshwar. So he is the master of the modes, and he is above the modes. So the Supreme Lord is never conditioned by the material world. He is always its master. And he is not like the living entities. He is the Lord of all the living entities. And in Bhagavad Gita we hear that he is upadrashtanumantas cha. So he is overseer and permitter. No other living entity can make that claim, that he is overseeing and permitting. Only the Supreme Lord oversees and permits. Everyone else is permitted to do something. So this is, of course, 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where we learn that the Supreme Lord is overseer and permitter. And we also hear that that Krishna is the Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So he is the original controller of everything. And he has many energies. Tam Ishvaranam Paramam Maheshvaram Tam Devatanam Paramam Chadaivatam Patim Patinam Paramam Parastad Vidama Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam Natasya Karyam Karanam Chavidyate Natatchamaschabhyadikas Chadrishyate Parasya Shaktir Vividaya Shruyate Swabhavaki Gyanabala Kriyacha, which is from the Svetasvatara Upanishad. Of all Ishvaras, there is one Ishvara. Of all Devas, Tam Devatanam Paramam Chadaivatam, of all controllers, there is one supreme controller. Vidama Devam Bhuvanesham Idyam. Of all planetary leaders, there is one supreme planetary leader. And no one is equal to or greater than him. And then we learn that no one can equal him in any respect, and that all his senses are able to do anything. Like we can eat with our mouths, but we can't eat with our eyes. The Supreme Lord can eat with his eyes. So his senses can do everything. And then we find that Parasya Shaktir Vividaya Shruyate, when he wants something, his energies automatically deploy to make that thing possible without him even having to think about it. So all of his energies are acting so wonderfully. So the external energy is his energy. And of course, the internal energy is also his energy. And we are the marginal energy, and we are also his energy. So everything is his energy. But we are in the middle, and we've got two great powers on opposite sides of us. One is the external energy, tempting us towards material illusion. On the other side is the Supreme Lord's divine energy, which if we take advantage of, we can leave this material world. So those are the two options. Everybody has those options. So how does the living entity get caught up in this material world? How does he get bamboozled by the material world? Well, that's an interesting proposition. And if you think about it, it really is amazing that this material world does such a good job of totally mesmerizing us, bamboozling us, that looks like there's so many wonderful material things out there. You just go to the internet and there it is, anything that you would want. What do you want? Nice car, nice TV, flight to some exotic place. Do you want to find some nice romantic partner? Do you want to become wealthy? Do you want to learn how to enjoy things on a virtual level? How we can take part in some kind of virtual reality. All this stuff is there. And so the living entity becomes attracted to these things. So there's desire. So desire plays a role. Material desire plays a role in how we get bamboozled. If we give up material desire, most illusion just falls away immediately. We are only attracted and we're only covered by illusion as long and as deeply as we have material desire. When we give up material desire, it's like the scales fall off immediately. We're not looking through a glass darkly anymore. We're looking face to face. But ain't so easy to give up all material desires because we have been attracted to them and we've been following them faithfully. From life to life to life to life, from one life to another, we have built up a particular menu of our preferred material desires. Each person has their preferred material desires. And when we die, we generally pick them up again in the next life. We may have gotten close, or we may have done something, but we didn't get as much as we wanted, so we just pick up where we left off in the next lifetime. So this is the nature of material desire. It attracts us, and because we're convinced that it will actually make us happy, we create illusions on top of illusions. So material desire plays a role. The three modes of nature play a role. Maya Devi plays a role. She gives us, visions of sugar plums dancing in our head, and we are attracted by that. She gives us the, you never thought about enjoying in that way, did you? But now there it is. Hey, try it. Go jump out of airplanes. Go, get in a boat and try to put a radio and some provisions in there and see if you can go across the Atlantic. All these various kinds of things. So all this is there, these various things that are attracting the living entity. Maya gives us these. And the material nature, the three modes, if we're really sunk down in them, then we are kind of fearful, we're confused, we're broken, we're not able to function well. If we're actually in the mode of passion, then we are robust, we are materially motivated, we are go-getters, and we are ready to get smacked in the face, And then if we are in the mode of goodness, we are kind of even-tempered, we're a little bit self-controlled, we are, thinking about how to do things in a way that's good for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the mode of goodness. So the modes have their effect. And we talked about the other day that in chapter 30, or rather chapter 20, in this chapter, in Canto 3, chapter 20, we hear about the 5 kinds of illusion. So once we have the avaranatmika and prakshipatmika. So the prakshipatmika, potency of Maya, throws us into the material world. And the avaranakshima, that potency covers us. It makes us believe that whatever we're doing is nice. So even Prabhupada says, a pig wallowing in mire and eating stool thinks, such wonderful stool. And this mud is so warm and so comfortable, So whatever situation we are, however nasty it actually is, we're still attracted by it in some way or another. So we're thrown and we're covered. And as we read about these 5 kinds of illusion, we first are attracted by what's known as tamishra, which is envy of the Supreme Lord. So through envy of the Supreme Lord or anger at the Supreme Lord, we go to Untitled. Untitled is this idea that death will be the end of everything. So we don't need to worry about karma or retribution or anything like that. Just get it while you can, because it's going to be over, baby. And when it's over, there's no calling anything back, you know. So that's Untitled. Then there's tamas, which is absolute ignorance of the soul altogether. We don't have any conception of the soul or what the soul is. So we see that in our society, this is just everywhere. Nobody has any knowledge about this. So that's tamishra. Then we have moha, which is identification with this body. I'm American, I'm Indian, I have these things are mine, and I own them, and therefore people with the same skin color, people with the same nationality, people who speak the same way, those people are special, and other people are not special. And so this is moha. And finally, mahamoha is this being mad after sense gratification, as Prabhupada puts it. So all these things play a role in how the living entity gets thrown into the material world and gets covered. Maya Devi, the 3 modes of nature, these 5 kinds of illusion, material desire, all these things are how the pure living entity, who has nothing to do with the material world, gets somehow convinced that actually he is part of the material world, and that the material world is the only thing that can offer him happiness. So most of these things work by the miracle of something we call ahankara, the false ego. That's the thing that convinces you, convinces me, that we are this body and that we will be happy only when we get the right kind of sense objects to plug into our senses. We have to have the right kind. Our menu has been set already for many lifetimes, which are the right kind, the best kind, and therefore we are searching for them. And this is the God project that we go on life after life doing, trying to find those right things and proving to everybody else that we are actually the supreme. All right, so now the third question is, if there's a super soul and he's actually the companion of the living entity from life to life, how can all this go on? Well, the super soul is speaking to the living entity, telling him, don't do it, don't do it. Here's a tip, just pass that right up, don't do it. But we go, I shouldn't do it, but it sure would be nice if I did it, you know. And so we ignore the super soul. And of course, when you ignore the super soul, the next time the super soul comes, you are already set on a path, on a pattern of ignoring the super soul. So you ignore the super soul again. And then you ignore him. After a while, you don't hear the super soul at all. And that's why people can do completely diabolical things, because they've gotten to the point where they don't have any compunction about causing others pain or murdering others or causing other people extreme suffering or even wiping out hundreds, thousands of people. They have not a second thought about it. Their super soul connection has gotten so dim. And this is how we get pathological people in the world. Through habitually and very dramatically ignoring the super soul, we get to this stage. And so this is kind of a summary of these three questions and three answers. The Supreme Lord, does he come? If so, what's he attracted to in the material world? If so, is he tainted by it when he comes? The other question is, how do we get bamboozled by the material world, by our desire, by material energy, by the modes of nature, by this whole system? And finally, if the super soul is with us, how does the super soul allow this to happen? Because the super soul is pledged to give us our free will. And if we insist on doing the wrong thing, the super soul will say, go for it, but don't blame me when you get whacked. You know, I didn't cause it. I tried to tell you no, but you didn't want to listen, so have at, and then watch out. So these are the three answers. And this actually does explain a lot about our world. So I want to leave some time for questions and feedback. So any questions or realizations or whatever?
Thank you very much for giving class. So something came to my mind as you were speaking. You were saying there's no such thing as material happiness. And I think I can somewhat understand what you're saying, but in my neophyte stage right now, I think I felt material happiness.
Right.
But one thing that I am coming to realize is I've definitely felt sadness. So so from that statement, I assume that there's spiritual happiness and there's probably spiritual sadness.
Yes, and we could say that too.
So how does one combat the material sadness with spiritual happiness?
Well, one of the things that I think sometimes people don't recognize or clue into is that there is such a thing as material satisfaction or titillation. You know, in other words, when we're really hungry, we eat something. There's a kind of satisfaction there. How long does it last? You know, maybe an hour or something like that. We get hungry again. Or, you know, the big ticket item, sex life. You know, you can have sex life. How long does that last? You know, and what are the feelings afterwards? You know, and all that kind of thing. And every material thing works like that. It's the smoking more, enjoying it less principle, that we do something and we find that it does give us a little boost, but then it kind of fades out. And at the same time, we feel this hollow emptiness. That's what we mean by there's no such thing as material happiness. There's no real satisfaction. That what we get is, you know, a connection of the senses with their objects and a little bit of, you know, some endorphins bump around in there, and we call that happiness, you know. But it's actually not deeply satisfying. No sense of really achieving anything, going anywhere, doing something with your life. All that's missing. So that's kind of what we mean. Now, spiritual sadness is kind of a whole another ballpark in itself, you know, that when a living entity is united with Krishna, the living entity feels very happy. But Krishna has sambhoga and vipralambha, so sometimes Krishna comes together with his devotees, and sometimes he appears to disappear, and then they become sad. But that sadness is actually also a kind of ecstasy, because there are actually no negative emotions in the spiritual world. So even sadness is a positive emotion. And it's not the kind of sadness that we know in the material world, although there is a kind of, loosely speaking, broad kinship there, you know. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Kavichan is going to say something.
Give up material desires. What exactly are material desires, and how? I get asked a lot, you know, how can I give them up? Not what they are, but how to give them up, how to, all those how-to questions, you know. So
Yeah, right. The easiest way to answer that question, what are material desires? Material desires are any desire that is not somehow connected to Krishna. So that's a very simple answer, you know. You can eat an apple, that can be a material thing, or it can be a spiritual thing. You can open a hospital, that can be a material thing or a spiritual thing. You can have sex, that can be a material thing or a spiritual thing. But the thing is, are you doing it for the Supreme Lord? Are you doing it for your own material happiness? That's what distinguishes the two things. Now, to get free from material desires, the best way is through the process that we know of as regulation, through regulating material desires. We regulate our sleep, we regulate our eating, we regulate our sex activity, all these kind of things. These things are regulated. And then the items that usually become focuses for our pushing something beyond where it's actually serving Krishna, those things become less of a stumbling block. So that's how I would say. Of course, by chanting Krishna's holy name, if we're actually able to hear Krishna's name when we're chanting, we discover more and more that those things that one time fascinated us when we walked down the street, we don't feel that way anymore so much, you know. Yes, you know, it's kind of, we remember at one time this was big in my life, I really want, but it was kind of in a time in the past. So through performing devotional service and through, you know, regulating the senses through chanting, we become gradually detached. And what this means, if you're losing material desires, that means your spiritual desires are increasing because the two are proportionate to one another. So if you become materially more and more engrossed, your spiritual desires shrink and disappear. And if you become more spiritually advanced, your material desires shrink and disappear. They just work in opposite tandem to one another. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So I was thinking about this point about how you were mentioning, you know, the third question, how do you can hear the super soul is telling you this, super soul is telling you that. How can, and also we hear today, oh, trust your inner voice.
Right.
So,
Right.
but how can we, you know, how do we know if it's a super soul or if it's my mind?
Right.
It's you know, because like, let's say like my mind right now tells me, why don't you give Arjuna another slap? You know, is that Krishna telling me to do that? Or?
Right. Well, I'm glad you asked this question because this is a very important question, and it has a very solid answer. The answer is that through Shastra Chakshush, we know what is actually the voice of the Supersoul. We're hearing something inside and we're reading it in the Vedic literatures, we know we're on the right track. We're hearing something inside and we're not hearing it in the Vedic literatures, then maybe the material desires are masquerading as a super soul in the heart. You know, it's a difficult radio station. It appears to drift depending on what our connection is with the modes of nature. We feel a connection and sometimes it appears that the station has drifted and we're not sure if we're listening to the same station anymore. And so through association with the spiritual master, the devotees, and with Vedic literature, we begin to train the intelligence. And the intelligence begins to be able, through checking things over with Shastric references, decide, oh, this is actually wanted. This is actually a spiritual aspiration. This could be the super soul speaking to me. On the other side of the coin, if we are attracted or think about something, but we can't find any kind of legitimate, reference anywhere, then there's a chance that we could be being misled by the material energy under the guise of some kind of spiritual direction. In the beginning, we need a lot of help, by hearing from the Vedic literature, and by taking association and guidance from advanced devotees, we can kind of sort through which is which. But as time goes on, as we progress in spiritual life, then we become more and more aware of what the Shastras are actually asking and what's really the voice inside. So that's why we have Chaita Guru inside, and we have the Guru outside. We have the Vedic literatures on the outside, and we have also those spiritual aspirations which can at a certain point become awakened and begin to guide us in the right direction. But that's something that takes some time to cultivate, because otherwise, if you follow the inner voice, as Dhanavir Swami used to say, when you try to go with the flow, you're actually flowing with the go. So go is a Sanskrit word for the senses. So when you go with the flow, you're flowing with the go. So that's what can happen. Oftentimes, what appears to be the voice inside is nothing more than the samskaras from our past lives, where we had certain material ambitions, and they're now surfacing, and they're saying to us, please, please, serve us, serve us. Okay, we'll give one more question, and then...
Thank you, Maharaj, for the lecture. Just wondering, when you're aware of that you have some attachments still and some things you want to find happiness in material life, you're aware of this, but you're not yet ready to give this up.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you work with this and not fall in Maya?
Yeah.
But
Akama
not like-
savakamo va mokshakama udarani tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purusam param. So whether one has no material desires, or one has all material desires, or one wants liberation, still, in any of those three cases, one should worship the Supreme Lord with all tivrena, with all their, all the focus they can muster. And in that way, they will become purified. So this is the way we usually describe bhakti yoga. We are performing what's known as technically karma mishra bhakti. We are performing bhakti, but we also have material overtones in the bhakti that we're performing. But if one continues in devotional service, the admixture will purify out, and eventually we will become pure devotees. Of course, if we recognize what our material attachments are, and we make an effort to pray to have them removed, we make an effort to regulate them or push them further to the back, then that will work even faster. All right, so I don't want to incur any wrath of anybody who's managing time and everything, so we're going to end at this point, and I thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.